All right, so here we are with part 2 for the chapter 3 recording, and we're basically, we are talking about the basics of crime scene photography here. And so one of the things that we need to discuss before we even really start thinking about doing all those overalls, mid-ranges, and close-ups is the idea of snagging your pictures in a world as is. So the idea here is when you show up on scene, before you do anything, you take pictures. Now, remember back to Intro to CSI when we talked a little bit about the fact that, if somebody is hurt, you're going to render them medical aid, and then you'll begin your CSI skills. So that would trump this, but in all other scenes, what we want to do is, as the scene is found, we take the pictures. So you show up on scene and you start documenting the scene if possible. We got to do some other things to secure the scene, make stuff safe, but when we get to that point where it is time to take the pictures, we don't go circling things in chalk, and we don't go throwing out those numbered and whatnot tents. What we do is we take the pictures. We used to use the Latin term in situ. That has kind of gone out of favor in some respects. A lot of times we were kind of getting into this just using plain English. But as found, as is, in situ, doesn't matter. You take the pictures without adding anything to the scene, without taking anything out of the scene. You just take the pictures. Once the pictures have been taken, then we can begin doing other things. So, if you need to use these little placards to, identify items of evidence, that's great. There is a place and time for these placards. Not every crime scene needs them. But what you need to do is take an array of photographs first. Then you can go out and start placing these placards and snagging photos with the placards in scene to help identify the pieces of evidence. This is a great example. You've got a bunch of bullet casings on the ground. You really can't see the bullet casings, so they blend in. They're a little bit harder to see, so the little tents here help to identify where all these little casings are. Even the fact they have numbers helps you with how many you got. You got 80 of them out there, potentially maybe more, because the highest number I see is 80. So be cognizant of what you are doing as it relates to taking images without disturbing the scene, because once you move something, it'll never go back to where exactly it needed to be. And it's happened to us in the past where officers have snagged a photo or two, and then we start searching for evidence and doing things, and we forget about photography. Things get moved, and then you try and put them back in place, and you take, so you can do some additional photos, and it's just not in the right place, and it just never lines up. And that causes juries to think that we're doing stuff like planting evidence. Something else we have to worry about is the idea of zooming. Now, when we talk about taking images of a human victim, think of a human being as a crime scene. So overall mid-range close-up would be, taking a picture of them from head to toe, and then, getting the area of the body where the bruise is, and then getting close in on the bruise. Overall mid-range close-up, same idea. When we talk about human victims and sensitive body parts, yes, at that point, zooming and some of those things becomes acceptable. I would prefer draping a body and not using a zoom lens, but there comes times where it is appropriate in the close-up areas where we can use a little bit of some zooming. But for folks who are not into cameras and camera nomenclatures, when we talk about your different focal lengths or zooms, they are usually expressed in millimeters. So here's kind of a description showing a wide angle, might be a 14 or 20 millimeter to a basic wide angle, 24 to 35 millimeter. These are not film sizes. These are the numbers on the outside of the camera as it relates to the lens. Standard is right around 50 to 70 millimeter. Matter of fact, they usually say about 50 or 55, depending on the manufacturer, is considered human eye. So what we see is essentially the same as a 50 or 55 millimeter lens that you would find for a digital camera. And then we start getting out into the telephotos, where you get your 80s and 100, 200, and then as you start getting 400 and 600 millimeter lenses, you're looking at your super telephotos. So illustrating this, here we've got a picture of some old manor house, and you got some fountains and a trail leading up to it. So when you're standing in this spot at 50 millimeters, setting on your camera, you pretty much are seeing what you as a human being would see. And when you start going into the lower settings on the camera as it relates to that lens, you start getting where you can't see as much. It's gotten all wide and gotten distorted. And as we zoom in, we go back to our natural, and then we can start seeing basically like we're got a pair of binoculars to the point where, with the human eye, you couldn't see this window. I mean, it's up there, and here you are at 600 millimeters, and that window is like right there. Just kind of illustrating what you could see. If we've got us standing in a spot and we're using, different settings on our camera, whether you're seeing a whole bunch of stuff or whether you're starting to focus in more. And, normal human eye might have only seen this. All right, another little illustration here. This is one that, starts to make sense for people why you need to be cognizant about the zooming. Is, say you're taking this picture of a kitchen, and this is how much of the kitchen you can see from standing here. But if you use a wide angle lens, you can take this picture. But now suddenly the kitchen's distorted. It's kind of going off at an angle, and it's kind of drooping down and then popping back up, versus here, everything is parallel and it's right how it's supposed to be. Showing another illustration of how this happens. And I'm not saying that zoom lenses are bad. I'm just saying that, from a forensic standpoint, we want to use what we call the normal lens, that 50 or 55 millimeter lens, depending on your manufacturer. So here we have a couple of car frames. Actually, it's the same car frame. And in one image, you can see there in the upper left, we have a 50 millimeter lens, and those bars are parallel. And when we, zoom into it a little bit, what we end up with is we get a little barreling where you end up with the frame kind of bends out. And with the wide angle lens, you get kind of, this where it starts distorting in, where it looks like it's bowing in on itself. So we can get distortions, and here we have perfect parallel lines. Here they kind of bow in at each other a little bit, and here they bow out from each other, and that could create some distortion for us. And you start thinking about standing at a crime scene and taking a picture, and you start zooming in, or you start doing the wide angle thing, and a piece of evidence in one image might look like these two objects are this far apart, and the next image they look like this far apart, or they've moved together. Kind of like that whole idea of last week in the lecture, I showed you the knife on the porch with the lamp behind it, or the street light behind it, and from the one side they kind of looked kind of distorted, or actually no, it wasn't a knife, it was a bullet casing. It got kind of distorted in size. It looked like the bullet casing was all narrow, and the next image, the bullet casing was the normal size, but it looked like the bullet casing was basically almost up to the grass. But then when we came at the angle where we made that isosceles triangle, now we actually could see that the bullet casing was sitting back on the porch or on that concrete pad and where it was. So zoomings can cause those same issues. This is why we're going to be very careful about our camera settings and how we are approaching our scene. All right, so that really is the information we have for Chapter 3. Again, there's some other information, especially as it related to human bodies and sensitive body parts and draping of bodies and stuff like that. Some very great information, but it still is just part of that visual storytelling of trying to get the overall mid-range close-up and then close-up with scale. Just think of the human body as a crime scene itself. And as for sensitive body parts, that's pretty self-explanatory as to asking permission and respecting people's privacy. All right. If there's any questions, I'm available. Please make sure you shoot me an email, post on the discussion board in the Ask LaFave section, or you can stop onto the Public Safety Training Center and see me, or I'm available by phone. Otherwise, I will see you next week.